The MacBook Pro 13 was my first ever Apple computer. And you know what? My wife still uses that 2015 model as her main computer. So you could easily say that I've kind of got a soft spot for this specific version of Apple's laptop line. So it should come as no surprise that I consider the 13-inch MacBook Pro to be the standard recommendation when it comes to a travel or a small productivity laptop. The 2020 model was released back in May of this year, and I've been using this specific version for the past 2 months for all sorts of typing, scripting, working from home that's not specifically at my desk-ing. I don't think that that's an actual ing. But how is it held up? Let's find out. We gotta find something else to slam down because I don't wanna break the laptop. What's up everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. So I've released, it's no secret, if you've been following the channel, that I've released a ton of content about this computer because frankly, I think it's great. I really think this is the best computer in the Ultrabook category that you're gonna be able to find. Now, I know that might be a bit of a controversial statement. Dell has their XPS 13, Razer has their Stealth. There are other options out there in this segment. However, despite my dabbling in other computer brands, nothing stands up to the Pro 13. Now today, obviously, as this is the third follow-up video, we're not gonna go in depth. I just wanna refine some of my statements from my 1 week later video and mention a few other things about the laptop, both good and bad, that I've come across over the past 2 months. So let's get the refinement out of the way first. Before we get to the negatives, let's refine some of our previous statements. And on a quick note, just so that you understand what I'm talking about, this is the base model 1299 version. So it has the older 8th generation Intel chips and the slower RAM. The first part of the refinement is I just want to restate how good this keyboard is. The MacBook Pro 13 is absolutely my favorite laptop keyboard of all time. I've tried lots of different keyboards at this point, but this is basically the perfect typing experience for me. The keys, can you hear them? They're all nice and snappy to type on. They've got plenty of travel. The sound is muted, but it sounds substantial, and other pretentious thesaurus-driven words. I had to say that a few times because saying thesaurus is hard apparently. Look, basically it's great. What I really like about the keyboard though is because the body is small, the keyboard takes up most of the physical space. Now that's unlike the MacBook Pro 16. It's like the 13-inch was made around the keyboard. Now I do wish that it had physical function buttons instead of the touch bar, but besides that, everything about this is amazing. And it's really the keyboard that keeps me coming back to the MacBook Pro 13 instead of just using my iPad for everything. Now as much as I really like the Magic Keyboard for the iPad because it is great, it's not as good or as comfortable for long typing sessions as this keyboard is. I could easily, and maybe we should just to get it all out, I could make a whole video about this keyboard because the previous videos have shown that I love it and could obviously talk about it ad nauseum. I could talk about this keyboard forever and will probably continue to do so. Whew. Keyboards, man. They totally make or break a computer for me. So we talked about something that I really like. Let's keep that positivity train going for a couple more minutes because unfortunately, we do eventually have to make a stop at the negativity depot. I've been thinking about trains a lot recently. Either way, another thing that's continued to impress me since this computer came out is the power. I do have, like I said in the beginning, even though I have the base model i5, it's still a pretty darn powerful quad-core i5. I have zero problems with the power on display for this computer, legitimately. Legitimately, when I check out cheaper Windows machines, sometimes you have to overcome a certain hump of power to overcome the Windows optimization in systems and programs that run on Windows machines. And that's not a problem because you can get specs for cheaper on a Windows device. But I find that you don't have to do that as much here on the MacBooks. Even the MacBook Air, which I generally don't recommend, it can run all of the same programs as the bigger and stronger members of the family, even if it doesn't do it as smoothly or as thermally proficient. More on thermals here in a second. And I think a lot of that, a lot of the power at the low spec wise, at least from my perspective as somebody that does a lot of video editing, that comes from the T2 chip built into all MacBook Pros since 2018. Now that is technically a security chip and it does a lot for the overall security of the system, it manages and runs the fingerprint scanner, but it does have a transcoding element to it that does a really good job at making even systems like this base model Pro it makes it so that it can handle some pretty gnarly video codecs. HVEC, or H.265, is a very compressed, cutting-edge codec that cameras are starting to move through as they want to do bigger and bigger resolutions. They want to start pumping more information into files, and they have to compress it a lot. And other computers at this price point can't really handle that. That the MacBook Pro can edit it pretty seamlessly in Final Cut Pro X is a huge benefit. Like, that's darn impressive. Like, even the XPS 17 that I was checking out a few weeks ago came to a grinding halt with H.265. And in fact, this whole video is being edited on this MacBook Pro 13. Gary? I mean, and in that, we have some very beefy 10-bit footage from a very expensive cinema camera. This is not a weak laptop by any stretch of the imagination. But, and here we have to make that negativity stop, the power on hand does have a big problem. That big problem is called thermal performance. The thermal performance on the base model isn't great. Now, I specifically said base model because obviously that's the one I have right here. And the higher end version does have an additional fan and a more robust cooling system, so it should do better. I don't have one, so I can't really say. I can only speak on the computer that I actually have. And this single fan version, it does have a single fan. It's still powerful and it still does the work that I need it for, but it gets hot. And it gets way hotter than the 16-inch version that I use. And that 16-inch version has a much beefier CPU and it actually has a dedicated GPU. Like, it should have heating problems, but it doesn't. The most intensive task that I do is video editing, and that is both tough on the CPU and the GPU. So that's what I need the thermals on this system to handle, and there's no other way to put it. The computer does thermally throttle when it's under load. I don't like it, and I wish it didn't do it. The one thing that I will check that a laptop does when it comes to like benchmarks or specs or stuff like that is it has to manage the heat generated by its components, or you end up paying for specs and features that you aren't getting because of the engineering design of the computer. You could slap in the best and strongest processor in the world into a laptop, but if a computer limits its power because the processor overheats, you are throwing money away. And on this specific MacBook, I can notice the thermal throttling within a minute of starting a video render, with temperatures nearing the 100 degrees Celsius mark. That's pretty darn hot, and because of that, the computer limits the CPU's power during those high peaks of thermal levels. But I mean, so what though? Will you really notice a performance difference? If you are doing less intensive tasks like word processing, PowerPointing, etc., you definitely will not notice a difference. This has all of the power you could need, and it will not tax the cooling systems to use it that way. If you are doing video editing, probably not. You probably will not be able to tell the difference. I say this a lot, but I used a base model 2019 MacBook Pro 13 for 100% of my video editing last year for about 4 months. And during that time, I was perfectly happy with the performance. I'm sure it was also having thermal problems, but I didn't know enough at the time to pay attention, so will you notice? Only if you really look for it. The real problem though is for longevity of the system, that's something we'll have to find out in a few years. That we'll have to see how these components hold up to a few years of being at those hotter temperatures to see if there is some kind of design flaw that would limit this from like, can you hold on to it for 5 or 6 years? And the thermal performance is the only problem I have with the MacBook Pro 13. There are so many fantastic things about this machine, but I do wish even this base model had been given the bigger, stronger cooling system. Those things, cooling systems really make all of the difference in the world when it comes to a laptop's overall performance and value proposition. Blech. Okay, enough negativity talk. We had a positivity sandwich of this video where it was positive, negative, then we're gonna do positive again. Let's continue to talk about some of these standout features to me. If you saw my previous video about accessories for the MacBook Pro 16 in like a working from home scenario, you'll notice that even if you have an expensive Thunderbolt hub, you still have to use the included power brick because it's a big system that needs a lot of power, and it's very hard. Like, I haven't actually been able to find a dock that can handle that kind of requirement. Well, if you use the MacBook Pro 13 as your home system, you can power it with just about any dongle or any dock. This computer works so well with just about every home setup because of that lower power requirement. But it also holds on to a substantial amount of power. No, not as much as the 16-inch, but like we said in the video comparing the two, do you really need all that power? That really speaks to the MacBook Pro 13's versatility, which I think is the biggest selling point and the strongest overall feature. For example, this can be powered and push signal to a whole range of Thunderbolt 3 monitors, truly leading you to only need one cable to go from probably my favorite travel laptop into a fully functioning desktop mode. Boom. Done. Seriously, I hate traveling with big laptops. Just trying to get a big laptop through airports, it sucks. Trying to carry around a big laptop sucks. The 13-inch laptop, like this kind of form factor of every manufacturer, is absolutely my favorite size computer. Now, if I could get one of these in a 14-inch version with Apple's own ARM processors and roughly the same power as my iPad Pro, that would be my perfect computer. Seriously, I would pay a lot of money for that. And I think the MacBook Pro 13 is the closest that we can get to that like nirvana today. Another topic that I would like to refine my thoughts on are the built-in speakers. Since this laptop has come out, I've used a lot of other computers, and I just really want to say how good the speakers on this computer are. Now, even though they are pretty slim, you know, sitting right next to the keyboard, they sound fantastic. Now, I don't do a lot of listening to music, but that video editing is really important to get your audio straight. Like, audio is such a huge part of that process. And these speakers have a very rich and natural sound to them that you don't generally find on other computers at this price range. Again, if we're gonna compare it to the 16-inch MacBook Pro, they're not as good as the 16-inch MacBook Pro speakers because those speakers are probably the gold standard as far as laptop speakers go, but this is a very respectable showing. Gold stars all around. I don't have any gold stars. I'm using them all on my son's like reading chart for the summer, but if I had one here, gold stars all around. The last major thing that I want to refine and touch on is how good the display on this laptop looks. It continues to have an Apple Retina panel that is both shockingly sharp and color accurate. Again, leading towards that accurate color grading potential. You can have the most expensive camera in the world. Nobody's monitors are the exact same color. Your phone's probably different from your computer's probably different from your TV. So when you're editing, you need to have your monitor be as calibrated as possible to make sure that on every display it looks okay. And this one is very accurate. Now I do wish in that mythical MacBook Pro 14 that maybe the bezels are a little slimmer. The bezels here are probably the worst part about the display on hand here, but it's good enough. But at the end of the day, so what, right? Should you still get the MacBook Pro 13 2 months later? Okay, this is a much harder decision than when this computer initially came out due to one major thing, the iPad Pro Magic Keyboard. You can now get an even smaller, more powerful, better thermally managed, touchscreen computer for less money. I mean, that sounds obvious then, right? Sounds obvious. Why did we even make, Gary, why are you wasting my time making this video? Okay, so for some that will be the case, and for others, not as much. Personally, I really like both devices, and you've heard me say this, I've had my iPad attached to my hip since the release of that Magic Keyboard, but it's only as powerful and as useful if you already have a main computer. I don't think the iPad Pro is still yet to the point that I'd recommend it all by itself without anything else. It gets closer and closer with each software update, but there are still a few things that I need from a more traditional computer experience that the iPad's not providing me. And that's mainly because of how hyper-focused and optimized it is around the specific apps you're using. It's not really all that functional yet for multitasking, and the file system continues to be less than ideal. And by less than ideal, I mean it exists, and it's functional, but it's very, very rough around the edges. But thankfully, it pairs really well with a laptop with things like Sidecar, AirDrop, and other Apple ecosystem abilities. However, if you can only have one computer, I'd easily recommend the MacBook Pro 13. It's way more versatile, definitely gives you those desktop level processes and functionalities. It's plenty powerful, has a great display, and it's reasonably priced for what you get. I think it's still a fantastic laptop, and it still holds up. Thankfully, I mean, it's only 2 months old. It's a baby. Thankfully, it still holds up, right? And if you do consider buying one after watching this video and you'd like to set it up for your home office, thankfully, I just released a video yesterday showing all of the cool accessories that will help you out. It's for my MacBook Pro 16. It will transfer over to a MacBook Pro 13. You can find it by clicking right here. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.